So this is Crossway House in Bracknell. It's difficult to get a proper view of it at a distance because as you can see there's just an awful lot of clutter here. You've got the bandstand, you've got the trees, which in my opinion there's some cases where putting trees in an urban environment actually detracts. The reason I like this building is because it's of a certain age, before you started getting other architectural movements. I'm not an expert on these. Before you started getting things like, I don't know, postmodernism or what have you. It's got a brick facade to it. The windows are quite evenly spaced, it's quite ordered. It's interesting in that it is apparently suspended above ground on these delightful pillars here. Obviously there may be some more support in the shops underneath. Let's go and take a closer look. Because people don't care too much about it, it doesn't have the most inspiring of entrances. But look up here and you see these decorations, which are, again, of their age, surrounded by the brick, and again, quite well proportioned. Obviously, again, not being repaired very well, but if you look here at the staircase, this is to the side, by the way, quite beautiful in my view, and a shame if it was to disappear, because I don't think they make them like this anymore. Here's the rear of the building. I do like the way you've got these small windows which are embedded in the brick facade, is that the right word? And then you've got the row of windows there. Again, it's just quite a pleasing aspect. This is the view of the building looking from the right to the left. And as you can see, it looks as though it's balancing on these pillars. And this is the left side of the building, again looking up, and you see these windows embedded in the brick facade. And over here we have another, what would you call that, a relief? I'm not an architectural expert, but I know what I like. So we've got a nice little relief there. Again, it's shielded by these ghastly trees. Nature shielding the brilliant work of mankind? I don't know. Perhaps I'm being a bit too pretentious. And here's the right-hand side. You have the windows embedded in the brick over there. And moving over, we've got another one of these delightful staircases with the, I don't know, wrought iron banisters on the inside. I'll try and get a better view. Here's the building from the rear and the right. As you can see, I just think that it's very well proportioned and it's very regular, and I just like the way that they've used brick instead of concrete. And I think it's of a kind of building that, well, people don't really like the architecture of the 50s and the 60s, but this, to me, it just stands out because it just looks so well constructed. It looks nice, and what's happened is that it's been plonked slap in the middle of this concrete shopping centre, and everybody thinks that this concrete shopping centre is out of date and a horrible mistake, and it may well be, but the solution for this new town is simply to delete it and start over. So you never get a proper, you could say, centre, heritage to the centre of Bracknell, simply because what happens is that every time it gets done, it gets redone, say, I don't know, 4 or 5 decades later. I mean, what if they did that to the centre of London? It'd be quite ridiculous. So this is not a plea to save this piece of, for want of a better phrase, old Bracknell new town, simply a plea to consider this Crossways House building, because I think it really stands out as a good example of the kind of construction of that period. Just a sweeping shot of the building in the context of its surroundings. You've got this, looks like 1970s vintage block of flats there. How they could design something and not work out that it was going to get that nasty streak on it, I don't understand. Looking at ground level, as you can see, you've got the bandstand there. And across the way there, you've got this office block with a mother care on it. So not a particularly inspiring context for it whatsoever. If it had been allowed to perhaps be freestanding with less clutter, then perhaps people would appreciate it more. But obviously, property prices in the southeast being what they are, that wasn't going to happen. The trees somewhat obscure the view of the building from the back, and sort of illustrates my point of perhaps of the unnecessary use of trees. They do provide a welcome degree of shade, but are they actually, apart from that, a positive contribution to the built environment? By way of contrast, here's another building in Bracknell Town Centre that's going to be scheduled for demolition, and this one, to be honest, I don't think it would be missed. It looks as though it's of the 1970s vintage. It's got that sort of fake pebble dash effect, which everybody hates now. And I don't think people will mourn its passing. Here's another example of, from my humble point of view, truly awful design. Absolutely no interest, no redeeming features whatsoever. An instantly forgettable building. It's highly likely that once demolished, people will even forget it ever existed. It's like the building that wasn't there. This is sort of a little appendix to my plea to preserve Crossway House. This building here clearly used to be a department store. The light, airy windows looks as though it may have even been built at roughly the same time as Crossway House. It's now run by a firm called the New Cut Price Warehouse, and so it's a bit like, I suppose you could say, a Woolworths, except it isn't Woolworths selling lots of haberdashery style goods and cheap cutlery and crockery and what have you. But the building itself, it's very nice. Completely unlike these sort of retail sheds that we get these days. And it seems to have lasted quite well. Perhaps as an indication of when this all was built, we have opposite the Cut Price Warehouse, we have this sign here which tells us that it was built in 1959. The site itself is now being used as some form of children's nursery. So this is another view of the old department store. Is it worth preserving? Well, the thing is that, from my point of view, you have buildings that were, say, constructed in the Art Deco period, and then in the 1960s or so, perhaps they fell out of fashion and they were demolished. And then people basically had a nostalgia for them. And presumably the same is also true of Victorian architecture. Perhaps there's insufficient nostalgia for something which is essentially just a box, but by golly, compared to what they're building these days, it has a certain interest and a certain solidity. So perhaps there may be a case for its preservation. Otherwise, as I said, all we do here in Bracknell is that we erase the immediate past and rebuild. There's no sort of history, there's no heritage. This is perhaps one of the bricks and mortar example of Bracknell's history as a new town, and perhaps it should be preserved and reused for something else.